Right, well, I'll just start with a little short intro, just whilst a few more people arrive. So my name's James Millington. I'm at King's College London, and I'm kind of coordinating the working group at the moment, with help from Callum, who's here. Hi, Callum. And Derek Robinson as well. Plus, we have a steering group. And so we're a working group as part of GLP, the Global Land Programme. And as the working group on behavioural models of land systems, we're interested in bringing together scholars and practitioners working on representing human behaviour and social institutions in simulation models. Whether those models are generally applied to land systems, so thinking about land use change, landscape dynamics, think anything kind of related to land change and land management, natural resource management, these sorts of things. This is our first webinar of 2024. We're hoping to have 2 this year. You can see on the slide here, the next one is lined up for 9th of July. We also have a session at the Open Science meeting in November in Oaxaca. And so we'll have some interesting talks there as well, hopefully. If anyone's joining that meeting, it'd be great for you to come along. So we've got about an hour here. We've got hopefully 2 super interesting presentations. Where we're going to do this is we're going to do each one in turn. So about half an hour each, 15 to 20 minutes presentation, and then time for Q&A afterwards. And we'll roll into the second one. So really grateful for our speakers who have given up their time to talk to us today. And I think we should crack on. So our first presentation, Hanna and Nils. I think Nils is going to provide a brief intro. Hanna, if you want to share your slides, that'd be great. And I'll hand over to Nils.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Hello, everyone. So Hanna, me, and a few other folks are working on an international project called Greenpole, and we're after understanding trade-offs in forest management and the role of forest policies in that context. And we have partners from Lund University, Copenhagen, and Helsinki. You saw that in the first slide. So we have a shared theory of change, and I'll come to why that is important, but I'll start with the theory. So we think of change and that socio-ecological system as something that is instigated by policy interventions, and that they propagate through the system through affecting people and their behavior, right? And then people's behavior change the forest system, and that produces then outcomes such as carbon sequestration, biodiversity, like habitat functions and such, but as well as timber production. So that's kind of the core of what we're interested in, and the trade-offs between these potential outcomes. We do acknowledge that there's more that's going on and that there are feedback loops, right? But nevertheless, to try to disentangle the complexity, that's kind of the core causal chain that we're interested in. And we attempt a combination of different models for something that we call an integrative policy assessment. So we have a system understanding here embedded in socio-ecological systems thinking. We start with the policy, as I said, and then this translates into land use and land use change, depending on how people behave in that landscape. There we use an agent-based model to try to capture that effect from policy into land use change, and then as well as timber production in that. Timber has carbon embedded, So we also use multi-regional input-output models to assess how the carbon that is then extracted from the forest system is traded in global value chains. In the Nordics, it's mainly pulp and paper products. So we have like wood flow analysis going on. But some of the carbon also remains in the ecosystem, or if we don't harvest it, stays. So we have a dynamic vegetation model called LPJGS that's capturing the competition between different plants in the ecosystem and where we can assess the carbon storage in the system. And then biodiversity we assess through joint species distribution modeling. So it is a combination, it's a modular architecture, that we combine and where we work on trying to make these models talk to one another. So that's one of the main tasks. We don't develop new models, but we try to make them talk to one another, to assess that kind of complexity in that system and to understand the trade-offs better. Yeah. Could we have the next slide?
Yeah, can you see it now on integration across?
Yeah, and so that's just a brief note, like an insight from our ongoing modeling work that, this integration is not necessarily easy because people understand the system differently. So we could call that an ontology. The people have different understandings of what we're actually looking at. The ways of how we assess the system, even if we understand it the same way, is different. The modeling approaches are very different when we look into kind of human behavior. Different things play a role, and we even have we have qualitative interviews of the overall process to understand the system, right? So that means the ontology, the epistemology, and then even the semantics, that's to say the words, the terminology that we use to talk about these things may very well differ. It's a bit like we try to break that down in the paper that we've currently in submission or in review. But that is one of these challenges that we need to try. We do not just need to translate and make the models speak to one another, but also the researchers behind the models such that we facilitate a proper integration here. And I think I'll almost leave it at that. There's just, so insights from what we've learned so far from this kind of overall integration is that a shared theory of change does help the integration if we kind of at least understand that there is a general kind of causal pathway that we're interested in understanding and contributing to through different models. The modular architecture nevertheless allows to zoom into different processes, but also allows to zoom out and look at the overall system. And and we have a comparative political science approach to looking into policy instruments in different countries, and that then also helps for causal inference, right? If we see that things play out differently in different cases, then we can learn from those differences. And I'll leave it at that and then hand over to Hanna to zoom in a bit into the agent-based model.
Yeah, because I joined this project as a PhD student 2 years ago. I have a background in physical geography from Lund University, and now I moved into being based at political science and joining social sciences. And I think I really came into the project with this interest of like studying social and ecological systems and combining different ways of knowledge and knowledge production. So in the project ecosystem, I'm here in between how policy and how diverse actors affect policy implementation and what kinds of effects that has on forest land use. And I base my PhD work on on the social ecological systems framework, as is the base of the project, so from Ekstrom. And in the first paper, I tried to conceptualize what this would mean in a Nordic forest production system, that forests are equally shaped by both social and ecological processes, and that these could be, all from different kinds of governance systems to also the ecological processes of biodiversity and nutrient cycling and tree growth. And then I dived into the diversity of forest owners and forest managers. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this
You're breaking up a little bit, Hanna. Hi, Hanna. You're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if you turn off your camera and just speak. That might help with the bandwidth a little bit.
I'll do that.
Yeah, great.
Okay, let's hope you can follow me now. So I was saying that here you see 4 typical types of forest owners, just usually, or that you find in a lot of typologies. And what we did in this study was to start off with a thought of creating robust
You're dropping out again, Hanna, unfortunately. Can you hear
James,
me?
this is Lauren. I don't have an email from her either, so I think the problem must just solely be on her end.
Yeah. Oh, and now she's totally gone. Looks like it.
And that's from Sweden. You know, compared to Germany, there's actually pretty good internet here.
Yeah. Well, let's see if she comes back and we have a better connection. I wonder, Nils, do you have
I'm just checking whether I have the
broad
slides here.
overview? Yeah. Hi, Hanna.
Hi.
You're back. You disappeared for a while.
Yeah, I think I've switched internet now, so
Oh, okay.
maybe we can give it another try.
Great. Let's try again. Oh yeah, we definitely want to see these slides. Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
But to finish off about the forest owner types, we saw that using different methods create or makes us getting different insights into the forest owner types. So the big conclusion is sort of to maybe be a bit more explicit about the assumptions behind creating typologies, and that methods could be chosen with more with also taking the purpose of the study into account. As also different methods, often it's stated that a certain forest owner is the most common type, and here we could see that that also depends on the method you use. Different methods would reveal different forest owners being the most common using the same survey. But let's move on to the agent-based models, because in a recently published paper, Modeling Forest as Social Ecological Systems, I took this framework of social ecological systems and compared agent-based models that have been applied to forest management. And I evaluated or compared them to what extent they represent it's a system. And these a governance, a policy,
Yeah, you're breaking up again, Hanna, I'm afraid.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Let's try turning your camera. Oh, have you gone totally? Looks like it. Hi, Hanna. Do you want to try without your camera? We'll give it one third go. Let's see how we go. One third time.
Yes.
Right.
So these models see a few frameworks that are really good at capturing both the social and the ecological subsystem and how they interact. For example, the agent-based model for adaptive forest management, Crafty Sweden, and Social Harvest. So then I go into the case study of where I want to apply and understand how diverse actors affect policy implementation. And I use the case Finland, because in Finland we have a lot of private forest owners, and just as in Sweden, the production system is very industrialized and focused on clear-cut systems. And this is combined with policies that are, to a large extent, based on voluntary policy instruments and advisory services. And the ownership objectives and ownership rights are very strong. Which is a payment for ecosystem services program, is interesting because it comes into this context of a highly industrialized forestry system. But the program in itself has a scientific basis and a weighting mechanism to try to identify biodiversity probabilities and suitable sites for habitats. And this is combined with which of course could be studied in its own. But for now, and in the comparison of Nordic countries, Metso is often brought up as an example of an interesting case which have managed to get a lot of forest owners enrolled. So what I want to do is to understand the mechanisms and land use effects of this payment for ecosystem services, and to what extent recognizing owner heterogeneity support in explaining land use change following the Metso program. And I want to use Crafty Cobra, which I'm sure that other people in this room are better at explaining the details about. But it goes back to that the Crafty framework is enabled to represent this social ecological framework. And I want to focus on southern Finland, where the Metso program has been applied. And for now, we are thinking about calibration driven by observable behavior. We have people in the team who are working with agricultural systems and agent-based models in agricultural systems where positive mathematical programming have been used as an approach. And to our knowledge, that has not been worked with so much in forest ABMs, but I'm happy to get input on that if anyone sits on thoughts. And Merrill and Howitt's paper from 2014 is a very good example of how positive mathematical programming can be used for environmental policy modeling. And then I just want to show that, yeah, we have a lot of data available from Finland because of the forestry industry being very strong, but also because of this Metso program producing a lot of biodiversity data. So I also think it could be an interesting combination to the studies using Crafty already out now, which have been often focused on climate scenarios, and then maybe this could offer more of a biodiversity focused approach. And to wrap up, and maybe also connect to the next presentation, in parallel to the modeling, I have started doing walking interviews with forest owners, where I want to ask them and talk about what activities and relations affect their management decisions. And I am very interested in the activities that go beyond economic use, so berry picking and managing for cultural restoration and so on. And that's what we see on this picture, a meadow that was part of this forest owner's land. And he was explaining to me how these cultural values affect his way of managing the forest around it. So I think I stop there and apologize for the internet connection. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Hanna. No problem. Yeah, these things happen. But that was really great. That was interesting. Thanks. So let's we've got a few minutes. We can open up to the rest of the room, to the floor for questions. If anyone wants to raise a hand or jump in. Yes, Callum. Hi, Callum.
Hi, thanks, Nils and Hanna. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask about the typology process, because you mentioned that different methods of defining typologies could be suited to different purposes. And I wonder if you could go into a bit more detail about that, really. What methods are suited to what sort of questions, and why?
Yeah, we based that on an overview of farmer typologies to try to categorize what are the different purposes that typologies are used for. And for example, if we want to use the typology to be able to understand how many forest owners of a certain type that is taking up a certain practice or is aware of a certain thing, then a clustering technique like k-means clustering. K-means clustering is sort of in its design, it's designed to create equally proportioned groups, whereas hierarchical clustering have less of that. So I think those are the things that we then develop, and we, in the end of the paper, we have like a decision tree where we try to give a suggestion on, okay, if this is your purpose, then maybe these types of clustering techniques, and it's focused on quantitative clustering techniques, which I also should say. And I think also in some cases, maybe a combination of methods would like pull out different things of this often multivariable data set.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting. Having applied some of them, the question of where you put your cutoffs between the types is always really interesting, and maybe the multiple methods can help to inform that.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Callum. Hi, Brigitte. Brigitte's got a question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have a question related to the calibration of the behavioral side. You said you want to calibrate it using observable pattern or management. Can you maybe explain a bit how you intend to do it, and whether you want already at that step try to find out different behavioral types then, which may be a bit difficult, but do you have any idea how you want to do this calibration and what type of observable data you want to use?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is very much in the initial ideas, but from what I understand is that positive mathematical programming is based on observations and observation data, and then it is an iterative process to do the calculation. A lot of studies have done really great job of maybe basing forest owner types or the proportions of the types on survey, for example, surveys of these forest owners' values. What we're thinking now is that, like, what if we could go the other way around and see in the land use data we have and in the evaluation of the sort of policy we know how the landscape look like. So how the landscape look like would be like a proxy for if these forest owners apply clear cutting. It's also that the forestry practices in Finland are they are quite sharp in their, it's clear cutting or it's continuous cover forestry. So I think that's the thinking, that we know how the landscape look like, and can we like go backwards from there. But that's also, does that make sense? I'm really interested to discuss more.
Yeah, I could imagine that's a good first step. I'm a bit asking myself how then this is always also related to policy. So if you then would like to include policy in your model, then the behavior may change, and then it's maybe different. Yeah, but I think it's a good first step to assume if you have this current policy, this is a pattern you observe for the different types. Thanks.
Right. So we probably have time for one more question, if there's one more question out there. Or if not, I'll ask a quick question. You mentioned there at the end, Hanna, about cultural values, and I think you kind of implied that was on the back end of the project as an output, maybe. I didn't quite understand if those cultural values be included in the agent typologies, so if they're being used earlier in the project, or whether that's a kind of a back end sort of evaluation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for now I'm starting with the interviews in parallel, and then I'm doing this the modeling project that I described now as a first step. And then what I have been thinking about is to use the interviews and to derive some more insights into the decision mechanisms, and that could maybe be like informing, not in this stage or in this study, but maybe a later study, informing the model at an earlier state. And then that would be some kind of validation. But how I definitely hope to make some kind of integration at the later stage. But maybe in the time scope of the Greenpole project, it is more coming.
Great.
In the end.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks, Nils and Hanna. That was really interesting. And as Hanna kind of hinted at there at the end, some of those ideas towards the end there, I think, lead nicely into our second talk, our second presentation from Jelena and Jennifer. I think Jennifer is going to share her screen, or Jelena, you're going to share?
I will, yeah. Let me just get that set up.
I'll hand over to you and allow you to introduce yourself as you wish.
All right, can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. It's a pleasure to be with people who are both in that modeling world and the human dimensions world. So today, sorry, I'm Jelena Vukomanovic. I'm an associate professor at NC State University, and with me today is also Jennifer Koch from the University of Oklahoma. We're here today to talk about a recent paper of ours focused on lessons we've learned and shared as a collective in translating narratives for participatory modeling. So this work really came about from an organized session at the North American meeting of the Landscape Ecology Conference. And so the full list of authors is there. And Jennifer and I are just sort of representing the group. But we all work in this space of kind of landscape ecology, land change science with and knowledge co-production. For all of us, we've come through, our training has been more in ecology, natural resources, physical geography. And so we haven't had necessarily social science training, but we've all been involved. We've either all sought additional training in qualitative methods or have been involved in these co-production projects. Some of us for quite a long time. So that's who we are, and what we in this workshop or in this session that we organized at the Landscape Ecology meeting, it was a really fruitful conversation talking about our project in a very real way. I mean, I think we all know when we read papers, it's often the polished, glazed, version of how projects actually happen. So that those deep conversations we found immensely valuable. And that sort of led to the decision to distill these lessons from our own projects. So it's it's a pleasure to be with a group where I think I don't have to convince you of the utility of models to conceptualize, quantify, and communicate interactions, feedbacks, and linkages between system components, and also, as Hanna hit on, I think everyone here is also probably working in that social ecological systems or coupled human natural frameworks. And so we're all kind of immersed in this idea that engaging participants, stakeholders, communities in research is really necessary for many of the sustainability or environmental problems that we're all working to address. In particular, involving stakeholder perspectives in participatory modeling fosters better understanding of the problem. It allows us to evaluate the acceptability of trade-offs and hopefully ultimately creates buy-in for management or other actions. But that's wonderful, and I think there's a growing consensus on the value of participatory work, growing opportunities. But these stakeholder inputs often take the form of rich, complex narratives rather than model-ready numerical or categorical inputs. And so translating narratives into models or model parameters or scenarios is really an essential step for leveraging stakeholder knowledge and engagement. And there are numerous tools and approaches used to translate narratives, such as the story and simulation approach. As Hanna mentioned, the agent-based modeling are two common approaches. And Malinpali et al. Provide a nice overview of like the 10 most common methods. But despite this growing literature and participatory modeling, that translation step is often what we found to be opaque and difficult to navigate, because we need to consider, as researchers, model complexity, temporal and spatial mismatches between social and ecological processes, conflicting stakeholder perspectives, and a lack of understanding both of model capabilities and, I think very importantly, model limitations. When we looked at some of those translation methods in our session, what we came across is that we often had to adapt, combine, use our own judgment as we worked through our own projects. And so we wanted to share practical advice that was drawn from our experiences. We certainly do not have all the answers, but we're really just hoping to open the conversation. I think we found that there's a lot of value in sharing lessons learned and common pitfalls in particular, in the hopes of expanding the community of researchers who are involved in this type of research. So we drew from 7 projects across North America. One of the projects spanned northern Mexico and Guatemala, so that's why we're in Guatemala. And these projects really were of different scales. So we had some very tight boundaries around single islands. We also had very large, expansive boundaries, the whole Rio Grande watershed you see in panel D. And we covered, temperate eastern forests, plains and grasslands, Mediterranean chaparral in California. So a whole range of different environments, both biophysical and socioeconomic across these studies. And from these projects, we sat as a group and talked about what was really important, what we learned from doing this work, and we iteratively kind of distilled it down to 8 lessons to provide some practical guidance for others. I'm going to get into a few of these in just a moment. They're sort of organized here in the general order a researcher might encounter them as they're initiating and then going through a project. And then in the paper, we also conceptualized these lessons by linking them to 2 well-established frameworks. So in the outer ring, we have an adaptation of the framework from Jakeman et al. That shows kind of the model development process, and then in the inner cycle, I think that's from Tompkins and all, the stakeholder engagement process. So we tried to connect these 2 different frameworks. In the orange arrows are the translation and integration linkages between these 2 frameworks. And in particular, we wanted to emphasize iteration because that emerged as one of our most important lessons. Now, Jennifer will speak to that more in depth in a second. We also included a detailed table that include details on how we actually did our projects all in one place. So what kind of models we use, the numbers of scenarios, stakeholder engagement methods, just to, I think there's value in just seeing these things in one place. And if there's something that resonated with the project description, for someone to be able to see like what it took to actually do that work I think is helpful. And so we wanted to provide these details. We also sat down at the end after we had distilled these lessons and talked about, for our projects, which of these lessons was the most important, moderately important, and least important. So we could get a sense of which of these lessons was emerging over and over again is really critical across projects. And I will say this is important to the project as it happened, not in theory or kind of an idealized version of the project. So, as a group, we talked a lot, for example, about how important it is to define boundary conditions. Of course, you're all modelers, that makes a lot of sense. It didn't end up being that important for some of the projects, just because of the nature of how projects come about. So sometimes the funding's already come through and it's defined for a certain area. So this is just how it emerged in practice rather than conceptually what we think of as maybe the most important thing. I think, Jennifer, I'm going to hand it off to you. Jennifer's going to hit on three of the lessons that emerged as most important for most of our projects.
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. So as Jelena mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the three most important lessons, and they are pretty much introduced in order of importance. And one of the most important ones, or the most important one, was that the process is just as important as the outcome. So you may have seen in the table that a lot of our projects, or almost all of our projects, besides focusing on the quantitative modeling, also had a strong qualitative component. So in different ways, as you can see here, we had workshops, serious game sessions. A lot of the projects also had semi-structured interviews. So we had a rich part of qualitative data that was crucial to all of the projects. And during those data collection exercises, I want to say, we learned a lot. So there are the typical references of how that's like empowering the participants, how it's like building networks among the participants, and also handing them tools, thinking about activism of different communities, different ways of how they can argue for their own goals. And that was an important part, but just as important was also the conversation among the researchers. So as Jelena mentioned, most of the people had a landscape ecology-ish background, but several of the projects also had humanities scholars or social science scholars as part of the project. And so the learning on the project team side was just as important as the learning on the I guess, participant side. And that was something that was very important to us. Also, I think some of the projects were very much guided in their outcomes by the feedback from the participants. So in the project that I was PI on the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, we used the Envision modeling framework, originally setting out to focus on the relationship between agriculture and water use, thinking about the ecology of the river, which is one of the focus basins of the Climate Adaptation Science Centers in the US. And while talking through the people that actually live in the study area, we learned that there are other concerns that very much affect the ecology of the basin that are at the forefront, thinking about migration, how that affects management of riparian vegetation, how that affects the ecology of the river, how that affects tourism, which is one of the major income streams, thinking about the Big Bend park down there. And so we learned that maybe our focus in terms of research was not something that was really of as much importance as other topics that I guess dominated the conversation and the news cycle as well when thinking about this river basin. Next slide. So, and the next most important lesson was the importance of the iterative process for a variety of different reasons. On one hand, applying an iterative process takes away the pressure to get it right the first time, right? So we can learn and improve, thinking about model parameterization and validation that in itself always needs some type of iteration. And then also thinking about the integration between qualitative and quantitative information. Oftentimes the data collection efforts also happen on different time frames. For example, in our project, we worked with a group of anthropologists that conducted 2 years of field work. And so we started developing the simulation model and then checking in every 3 months or so to update each other about newest development and how that would affect the model development. Next slide. And then one other lesson was also the importance of a synthesis narrative, as I mentioned or talked about quite a bit, is the importance of bringing in the qualitative information. Oftentimes, a lot of the modeling focuses on the numbers for a variety of reasons, right? So thinking about court cases, for example, where it's really important to have the numbers, the facts, as compared to stories, right? Or qualitative information that is often dismissed. But in our what we found was that it is really important to combine different types of information to provide a more nuanced description of the situations. And one way to do that was to put together this synthesis narratives where we combine multiple perspectives. And this in itself is also quite time consuming, but really important, right? Because this is where all the different perspectives should be carefully combined into a narrative that pretty much covers the broad spectrum of perspectives and thoughts of the people involved in the research, and also the participants of the exercises working with practitioners or stakeholders or policymakers. And I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. It was super interesting. Okay, so that's great. We're on time, so we've got maybe 10 minutes for questions that people might have. I'll open it up to the floor, to the room. If you want to raise your hand or jump straight in. I didn't see who was first. Who was first?
Nils.
Okay, Nils.
It gives you the order. Yeah, thanks. I was wondering, like, participatory method. So I heard 2 different things, and I was just curious. In a way, you said your system understanding was informed by people, by stakeholders in the place. They said, hey, it's actually other things that matter here. Yeah, that is a bit of a kind of informant participation, if you so want. And then there may be more deeply integrated participatory methods. I was wondering if you differentiated there, or like, yeah, what your reflections on that is. It's like we're wondering ourselves how far to integrate them, right? Is it more to validate, or is it to work together really? And yeah, that's kind of
just
thanks.
As a reminder, this was a collection of a variety of different case studies, right? And so So I think with regard to your question, it depends on the specific project. In the project that I led, we were trying to take a very open approach, right? So we had like Envision as an integration or integrated simulation model has this toolbox of different process-based or statistical models that we can plug and play and then hard couple with an agent-based component to it. And of course, we wrote a proposal, we got funding, and we set out to analyze something specific. But in a first step, we also wanted to see if that's actually something that's interesting to people living and working in the study area. So we were hoping to get some input about which are the I guess, subsystems of our socio-environmental systems model that they would like to see developed. And so that's where these migration conversations came up, because there's this big, I'm not going to talk about the social component of that, but just from an environmental perspective, there's a lot of things happening there, thinking about pesticides applied to remove riparian vegetation to increase line of sight, how it affects labor, right? So how it affects also tourism. There's a lot of, I guess, river rafting going on. All these things are affected by migration, or not migration, but necessarily, but by the policies built around migration. And that's just something that we didn't necessarily expect to be such a major topic. And that was really interesting, right? So ultimately, we've built our simulation model, but very few people were actually interested in that, in the simulation runs. There was much more interest in describing the complexities and all the different processes that happen at the same time, shaping the environment and the environment shaping the social system in this study area. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jennifer. Jelena, did you want to respond to that?
I think Jennifer covered it. Yeah, the projects just varied tremendously. I mean, like Jennifer had the option to expand and the boundary and the people involved, but like Colin Byers' project was defined by a certain protected area in Upper New York State, and that boundary was there. And so the learning and iteration just happened in a different scope in terms of like what activities people were doing there. But I think we all in some way changed our scope or priorities or methods used based on that feedback. But it did differ, and they also had different durations. Some of the wetland projects in California was 6 to 7 years, and some of them were more in the 2-year range. And so just the possibility of iteration was very, very different.
Right. Thanks. Callum?
Yeah, thanks for the interesting presentation. It's kind of partly answered it, I think, but I'm curious about how much the modeling process helps to work through or to obscure really controversial issues, you know, real differences in perspective between stakeholders. Because I can see to some extent it can do both, has done both in other cases. I just wonder what your experience is of, if there are very contentious issues, does it help do that quantification and abstraction step, or does it simply hide it away so it's not really dealt with anymore?
I'll start with the first thought that came to mind. So one of our projects stuff the spaces between the basis project, and it's in northern it's in North Carolina, which has probably the largest military presence in terms of bases of any state. It's also very rapidly growing. And so the project was looking for places where there could be synergy between conservation interests and military needs. And that one was interesting because all of the participants were either worked for conservation organizations or the military. And one of the model outputs that was interesting was that some of the folks representing the military bases did not know what river basins were connected to their bases. And so there was like sort of accusations of like, what they're doing in Raleigh is coming down here, or what they're doing in Charlotte. I'm throwing out names. These are the two largest cities in North Carolina, and they're not even hydrologically connected. And so I think that for me was a striking moment, just assuming that knowledge was clear, and but they were just completely unaware of how those spatial interactions even in spaces where they controlled activity. I'm sure, Jennifer, you can think of other examples.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that directly responds to your question, but like following up on what Jelena mentioned, I think we heard a lot of the finger pointing, right? So where it's like upstream, downstream, especially in a like shared river basin, where it was almost like there is no need for us to change anything because it's the other people's fault for using up all the water. And that was not, like, in some cases, yes, maybe in other cases not so justified. But I think that was really interesting to hear this, I guess, conflict being brought up frequently. I think the strength of it was to just bring in those different perspectives, right? So in documenting it, and so I'm not sure if that would pretty much stash it away, right? So because ultimately it's written down, it's documented somewhere.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Okay, we're nearly at time, but I think we have time for one more quick question, if there's anybody. Elizabeth, if you want to ask her a question. Yeah, find that on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit related with the previous question that Callum did. So do you have any lessons learned regarding the management of influence or power among the stakeholders to guarantee this equal incorporation or mostly balanced incorporation of multiple perspectives?
That is the question. I think it's something to be very cognizant. I'm not saying anything new here, and that it takes, I think, some time working in a place to understand a little bit. So I'll just very quickly mention the project that I led was in coastal South Carolina, and a lot of it was focused on mapping cultural ecosystem services and values of long-term residents. And so there's just been a very fast, almost complete displacement of African-American families that have been there for many generations with the rapid growth of the Charleston area. And so in terms of the power dynamics, as I was saying, like in the paper, it sounds very intentional. It was just like very good luck. We started our workshops with just like long-term residents to do the initial mapping because we had heard mentioned that like when you open up the workshops to more and more people, like they will stop coming when there's like when it gets busier, when more newcomers come, because they don't feel like they get heard. And so for me, that takeaway was just taking the time to to have enough conversations to get a sense of what those power dynamics are. I don't have any answers for how to avoid them or what the best practice is, because I think it really depends on your objectives and whether, you know, it's to to have as wide a representation as possible, to really focus on underrepresented voices. I think there's a lot of nuance, but that it is certainly prevalent and it takes time to learn.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jelena, Jennifer. That was really interesting. We're just at time now, at the end of the webinar. So I'd just like to thank again all of our speakers, Nils, Hanna, Jelena, and Jennifer. Some really interesting talks and a nice conversation there as well. Thanks to everyone who's come onto the webinar and asked questions. As you can see on the slide here, our next webinar, 9th of July. Hope some of you will be able to join us for that. We'll have more details on that on the GLP website, and you'll be able to register via the GLP website. If you're a working group member, you should receive a newsletter with details on that too. If you're not a working group member, it's an open club. Come and join us. There's a link on the GLP website. You can get added to our email list to find out more about what we're up to. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for coming along, and we'll see you next time.